The man who successfully applied for arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin has now been suspended from his job. We're talking about Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. He's been suspended following a UN investigation into alleged sexual misconduct by him. But just to be clear, this doesn't mean that the allegations against him are true or proven. In fact, following his suspension, his lawyers said in a statement that, quote, the decision is unlawful, procedurally unfair, and unsupported by evidence, unquote. But here's why his suspension is a big deal. Firstly, something like this has never happened at the ICC in its little over 20-year-old history. Secondly, the way the investigation into the sexual misconduct allegations have progressed have been heavily criticized, leading many to wonder if the ICC can't properly investigate alleged sexual misconduct by its own officer, how can it hope to investigate things like crimes against humanity? Let's speak to Danya Chaikel about that. She's a solicitor and currently representative of the International Federation for Human Rights to the ICC. She's worked for the ICC and other international courts and tribunals, such as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the Specialist Prosecutor's Office for Kosovo. And she's also worked for various NGOs and UN bodies. My first question was going to be something else, Dana, but I'm drawn to asking you, is there anything that you haven't done? It's just rhetorical, but welcome. Thanks for making the time. You know, there's many elements to look at in this whole affair, but first I'd like to look at the sexual misconduct case itself. It's been about an 18-month-long investigation conducted by the UN because the ICC is not really under the UN, therefore the UN was an independent body in a sense. Media reports first emerged in 2024. The question is, why has it taken so long for this investigation to happen?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on your show. In fact, workplace misconduct investigations at international organizations are never quick. And this investigation ran for just over a year, from late 2024 to the end of 2025. And for better or for worse, this is really the typical timeframe for this kind of investigation. I think people forget how potentially complex this kind of a case can be, and this is no exception. We're not talking about a single incident or perhaps one, say, altercation in a meeting in the office. The allegations, as reported, are of non-consensual sexual contact, reportedly, happening in different locations and countries, including at the ICC itself, at the prosecutor's private residence, and in overseas missions. And then we saw a separate strand of allegations about retaliation against the whistleblowers who initially reported the allegations. So every single one of these strands has different people, different witnesses, documents. We're here, potentially thousands of pages of documents, electronic evidence, phone records. And then you have to meticulously ensure confidentiality, privacy, due process for the prosecutor. There are so many obligations to think about. But I think it is a problem overall that these investigations go so long, but that's a much bigger separate question. And that's about resources, quite frankly, because typically they have one investigator doing all of this. So if you have one versus four, it can change things.
Okay, so that's the logistics of it. But just in terms of the impartiality and the transparency over here, the UN basically was asked to carry out this internal probe by the ICC because the ICC wanted an independent probe. And it was in December last year that, according at least to the Associated Press, the probe basically said that there was evidence that Khan had, quote, I'm going to quote from what the AP was saying, there was evidence that Khan had, quote, non-consensual sexual contact with the aide in his office at his private residence and whilst on mission, unquote. I mean, that sounds pretty damning, isn't it? From a body that has been asked to carry on this investigation. That was in December when the report came out, and he is suspended only now in June. Why the delay here?
Well, there was an extra layer or step in the process, which we very much advocated for, because this is a political body making decisions about potentially, even at at one level, even removing an official. It was advised, and there were a lot of discussions internally to have an extra step of an ad hoc expert panel, which then was able to receive the report from the UN investigators. And they were asked simply in an advisory role. This is, they were actually judges, but I was privy to all the meetings in the last couple of years. And these panels are something like an internal legal advisory office, kind of your lawyers that you would have when the prosecutor or the registrar at the court has their own, cases. Hey, my colleagues, can you please assess, do you think this amounts to misconduct after the investigation happens? And so they're meant to just advise. Their advice is not binding, but that was necessary from the facts received from the UN, which are just facts. The UN and investigators do not say this amounts to sexual misconduct, this amounts to retaliation. They just find facts and say they did or did not happen. So this panel had several months, and I can explain more about what the outcome of that was, because that has been very controversial as well.
Exactly, because they said, I think, something to the effect that there wasn't sufficient evidence here, and then there was another body after that which saw it differently, and therefore now we have a suspension. Is that the sum of it?
It's something like that. And I think the problem too is it sounds very confusing and complicated, but I would say one criticism we've made is that the body in charge of doing this, the Bureau, which is an executive body of the states parties to the ICC, we really have recommended more transparency, because it isn't that complicated in terms of the steps. The investigation happened. This advisory panel was supposed to say, okay, here are the facts. Is this amounting to misconduct, or and which kind? Serious or less serious? That was it. Instead, in our view, that was, their mandate seemed to be a little bit larger. We heard reports that submissions were allowed by the prosecutor, and that it could be kind of quasi fact finding, that they took on a bigger role. And in reports by several commentators, it's being reported that this was a judicial panel, and that states should follow their judicial decision. This was not a judicial decision. The panel didn't even have to have judges. Again, it was just legal advice. And now when they've had we haven't seen their final report, but what we see in the media is that they could not resolve like he said, she said, conflicts in facts. They apparently, and I haven't seen it, couldn't decipher what the investigators found to be factual. Here's the biggest point. Why didn't they go back to the investigators and clarify that? That's exactly what normally happens at the ICC internally. These bodies should have been working together. Instead, what we understand, they couldn't finish the job. They actually apparently said, there's not enough here to say he did or didn't do this, or any of it. It's inconclusive in a way. But they were asked to determine if there was serious misconduct on a very high threshold of standard of proof. And based on that one question, they said, no, we can't find it. But I'm just unpacking why that might not have happened. And if they went back to the UN body and they still wasn't resolved, then I would see how this was a final recommendation by the panel. So I have no problem with the states now looking at the initial report and taking more time to unpack if they can see if the fact finding was, if those were conclusions after a year-long detailed investigation. What were the facts that they concluded?
I mean, it's great that you're being able to unpack so much of this. And just for the benefit of our viewers, just worth mentioning that you don't work at the ICC, you don't work for the ICC, you are independent, you're representing another organization. to the ICC. But because you're connected and you're a solicitor and a lawyer yourself, you're providing that opinion. Just wanted to sort of put that out there again. But from the way you describe it, it's just one process after another process. To me, it sounds like the ICC was inventing processes as it went along. Is that fair? Is that correct? Or is there a laid down procedure of this is what you should do if there is a sexual harassment allegation? I mean, companies around the world have been faced with these kind of allegations in the past, and there seems to be laid down processes. Here it appears to be not the case, or do I have that wrong?
No, I mean, there is a process, but I would say the sort of fine print, some of it had to be still worked out, but there is a harassment policy that applies to the elected official, to the prosecutor, and there are a lot of internal, documents and guidelines, and normally there's definitely a reporting process for persons, staff, and others to go to. I would say they know this. They need to make it more clear, understandable, because right now I do think staff at the court, not just in this case, don't feel that it's very clear, or that the accountability or investigation, it's all a bit opaque. It is there. I know it very well, but I think it could be much more accessible, because the court has a zero tolerance policy for harassment, sexual harassment, bullying, abuse of power. And that is hard to reconcile with such a very, I would say, it's a bit of an overwhelming and not user-friendly process. So that would be something they really need to work on, and they've admitted internally they have to. I think the allegation that it's being made up, in December, the ad hoc panel process has been adopted for future investigations of judges and prosecutors, because states have recognized they need a much more solid and comprehensive process for these allegations. Otherwise, they won't have proper investigations or accountability.
Okay. Danya, thanks very much for that. Stay with us on the line, because if just in case people are just joining us, a quick reminder why we're talking about the ICC and the suspension of its Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan. Just to place it in context, one just needs to look at the cases that the ICC has dealt with and is dealing with. For example, I mean, it was founded in 2002, and you had Thomas Dilo, who was the first person to be arrested and tried by the court. He headed a militia in the DRC and was sent to prison in 2012. Then you had Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who became the first sitting head of state to be the subject of an arrest warrant in 2009. Then you had Dominic Ongwen of Uganda, who was convicted in 2021 and sentenced to 25 years in prison for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Russian President Vladimir Putin was charged in 2023 alongside Commissioner for Children Maria Lvov-Belova for their role in the forcible abduction, deportation, and adoption of children from Ukraine. And very recently, arrest warrants were issued in 2024 for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for alleged crimes against humanity and war crimes in Gaza. And you also had commanders from the militant group Hamas who were also charged for similar crimes in Israel and Gaza. Just a bit of context setting for viewers who are just joining us. Danya, quite clearly, a lot of very crucial cases. Do you think that the current case against Karim Khan and the way it has been handled, and you also talked about a lack of transparency, you think all of this taken together sullies the reputation of the ICC and potentially affects its credibility on the world stage?
Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is an issue that we have been putting forward, in every meeting. This absolutely damages the court's reputation. We can't pretend it doesn't. This would damage any institution. But I think we have to be very careful about where the reputational risks really lie. The reputational risk is not about the accountability. It's impunity if we let this just not be dealt with. And I do give praise to states and the Bureau in particular and the ASP president for finding a way, despite, by the way, the appearance and very much concerns about internal conflicts of interest. That's why the internal process didn't happen. It went external. So they are making sure there is a process to deal with these very serious allegations. And while it is serious and it has to be dealt with, I want to stress this is a problem globally at every institution and in the legal field, which I'm from. There's a rampant toxic workplace culture, epidemic almost, and people turn a blind eye to these kinds of this kind of behavior.
Yeah, but sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Pardon my interruption, but it's like we're talking about the ICC, right? I think maybe people's expectations of the ICC are much higher, right? I mean, it's like this is the organization that has to be unimpeachable if it is going to be making judgment on other people's and things like crimes against humanity, right?
And sexual violence. So, I'm not going to, again, sugarcoat the fact that we work with victims and survivors, and they have raised that fact. We want to make sure that the investigators, prosecutors at the ICC have impeccable records and, aren't conducting this kind of misconduct, especially around a kind of violence that they have faced. But there's a few things here. The other, the staff at the court are unbelievable, and they have carried on with their work, and they're experts on those areas. I want to stress that, and I'm a big supporter of this institution. But yes, you're right. And the point is, states, again, have a huge responsibility in electing the prosecutor and judges. So we have very much advocated for a lot more attention being placed. We have an election now for 6 new judges this year. This is the chance to make sure they have impeccable records. Not only have they not, don't have a record of misconduct, but that they make sure other colleagues and they know how to manage any kind of conflicts or misbehavior, and they know how to really inspire their staff. So that's a really important part of it. But absolutely, you're right. The prosecutor needs to have what's called a high moral character. It's part of in the Rome Statute that governs the court, and we feel very strongly that it's a low bar. So they have the leaders, and the prosecutor actually has to not only, of course, serious issues like this are not acceptable if they are true, but they have to act. I agree with you, much in a way that is beyond repute.
I do want to bring in something that has just happened as a reaction to what we are seeing today. You have Danya Chaikel, Israel's ambassador to the UN. He posted on X, and he's called we'll put that tweet up. That post up. Here it is. He's called the ICC rotten to the core and asked for the indictments against Benjamin Netanyahu to be cancelled. Do you think that he has a case there? Do you think that he has a point there?
Absolutely not. And I think the conflation between the Palestine situation and this case has to be we have to move on for it. There's been so many journalists and the court and others looking into this rumor of an alleged plot by Israel or the US, and there isn't a shred of evidence. So that said, of course, the states, the big powers that want this court shut down. And why do they want it shut down? Because they want impunity. They don't want the alleged extreme allegations of atrocity crimes against their own leaders and government to ever go before a court in The Hague. That's why they want it shut down.
Which states and people are you talking about?
I'm talking about Israel and Israel and the United States. The United States has sanctioned judges and the prosecutor and deputy prosecutors and NGOs that support the court because they and this is around the Palestine situation. They want to shut this down completely because Israel's a friend of the United States. So the fact that this case is happening, of course, it's going to be instrumentalized by powers that, and historic throughout the court's history, states have tried to shut it down because they do not want this kind of international accountability. So it's very normal that he would say this. It's typical, but there's been, again, no evidence that this is anything but reported misconduct. And now we're seeing whether the alleged, incidents, if they can be proven.
Okay, so the chief prosecutor now has been placed on suspension. So what happens then to the work being done at the ICC? I mean, does the work, you're talking about this motivated staff, does the work on cases and prosecutions continue, or there is maybe a slowdown?
It has not slowed down, and I'm in touch with staff very frequently. I'm not right now, but otherwise this week I'm actually at the court all week because we have our annual ICC NGO roundtables, and I in fact moderated a session yesterday with the deputy prosecutor. So this is very timely. And I'm going to be honest, it seems busier than ever. The fact that we're not seeing reported arrest warrants is because the judges changed the rules, the regulations of the court recently, so they can't publicize when they apply for new arrest warrants. But we recently even saw that there might be new arrest warrant applications for against Israeli officials. And I'll be honest, I talked to staff and they are really praising the leadership of the deputy prosecutors. And that investigation, you know, it started before the prosecutor started in his role, and it continued after. So yeah, I haven't seen it.
And Danya, one question about the complainant here, the aide, the unnamed aide, for obvious reasons unnamed, who made this complaint. I mean, she has seen this investigation move on for the better part, I mean, for nearly 2 years now. There's this suspension that has happened now. Do we know how she's feeling in all of this, how she views all of this and the way things have progressed?
Well, I think the point is we don't. In the public sphere, we only ever hear about the prosecutor. And of course, his rights are really at risk, and he's the center of this process. But there's another person that is at the center of this process, and it's a woman who has come forward publicly to say that she's from Malaysia, she's a woman of color, she's Muslim, she wants people to know who she is. She's a mother, and I have to say, startled by the lack of even reference to her in most of the reporting or commentary, and how she has felt and how the process has gone for her. And I can tell you from what I'm understanding, and from actually speaking to one of her lawyers, or by the way, one pro bono lawyer, I want to say that too, there's a big issue of equality of arms because someone very senior has access to much more, legal counsel, and whereas someone who's a lower level staff member, there's no legal aid, there's nothing. So this is a very difficult situation in terms of access to justice. But yeah, this is has been, I would say, horrific experience, and that is something for her. And I think this is something that has to be looked at very closely. I have not heard that it's been victim-centered, that there has been care given to her, enough to her protection needs and safety needs, and I don't think it's been trauma responsive, which I know is a buzzword, but and just on that one, a big example is that states, I hear them talking, why, they're not aware of how this works. Why would someone stay in this job if they've been treated this way? That isn't logical. And of course, one would respond, well, why would, if she is a victim of any kind of misconduct, why would a victim have to quit their dream job? Why would she still travel with him? And this is why I really, really urge states that are now going to make this decision to speak with experts who know about the normal reaction when victims and survivors in workplace culture scenarios have been assaulted or mistreated in other ways, the normal ways people behave. It's often not what you think if you've never been there. And there's often a survival reaction, and in those power dynamics, it's very normal to remain very kind and respectful to our most senior boss. And I'm not speaking to the merits of this case. I'm just saying that we can't use old stereotypes to say, that this isn't because this woman was nice to the prosecutor that, obviously nothing bad happened.
Does it surprise you, Danya, how often this point needs to be made when it comes to sexual misconduct cases, particularly when we're talking about an organization like the ICC, on which justice is dependent for a lot of peoples around the world?
Yes, this is The odd part or the different part is that this is states themselves. So we have senior diplomats and ambassadors, and I don't expect them to have been, having that kind of knowledge about sexual assault cases or, really women's rights or how the case law has developed in a more victim-friendly way. So I think they need to speak with their legal counsel and experts in their domestic settings that really adjudicate these cases, because the law has progressed massively. We know that. I mean, the law here in the Netherlands around rape has changed recently. For example, there doesn't need to be violence anymore to prove that there was rape. And we know that it's evolving. But I mean, so I want to separate that from the actual investigations by the ICC. Those are done internally by people who are very skilled on investigating sexual and gender-based crimes. These are diplomats. So we have an area that they need to develop skills in for this particular moment. Some are excellent, some have very much, and some are lawyers. So it's not to put everyone together, but I hope they are able to look at the whole picture. And remember, this is a person. The process seemed, and the statement that went out yesterday by states, there's no mention that this is, that there's misconduct, that I don't think misconduct is even used, or sexual misconduct, nor alleged, or that there's an actual human being that made those allegations. And I think that really is a disservice to victims and survivors of those kinds of crimes. And it is not admitting guilt. There's no, people would understand that these are still allegations, but I think actually erasing the victim from the statement is hugely, it's a problem. And it results in people feeling small and invisible and less likely to come forward if they feel they're not a part of this process.
The chief prosecutor has been currently suspended. What happens next? What is the next step in this case?
Well, the next step is, according to Article 46 of the Rome Statute, that all 125 states parties to the Rome Statute, all the states that govern the court, they're going to vote. And the result of that vote will be, they will determine whether, due to serious misconduct conducted by the prosecutor, if they think that happened, if he should be removed from office.
Okay. We'll be monitoring the news to see what happens, and maybe we come and talk to you again based on what the next steps are. Danya, thanks so much for taking the time out and unpacking this for us. There's a lot of legalese here. I'm glad we had you to be able to explain that to us. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you so much.